Knowing this, let's read chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or what laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy, who shut up the sea behind doors, when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, This far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me, if you know all this. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. Have you entered the storehouses, or the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain, and a plain for the thunderstorm, to water a land there no man lives, a desert with no one in it, to satisfy a desolate wasteland, and make it sprout with grass? Does the rain have a father, from whose womb comes the ice, who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? When the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen, can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Can you raise your voice in the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of waters? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you, Here we are? Who endowed the heart with wisdom, or gave understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens when the dust becomes hard and the clouds of the earth stick together? Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions when they crouch to their dens or lie in wait in a thicket? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? So yeah, that's a powerful chapter, and it's one that I've been anticipating and waiting for. But this chapter is when God speaks from the storm, and so finally we see this chapter shifts the entire conversation. Instead of defending Job or accusing him, God invites Job and us into awe, into humility and trust. God speaks out of the storm, and what he says isn't a direct answer to Job's pain, it's something even better. It's a reminder who God is. So knowing this, let's look at it expositionally. So in verses 1 through 3, we see that God enters the conversation. In verse 1, he says, "Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm." In verse 2, he says, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" So, after all the human wisdom and theology, God breaks this silence, and he speaks from the storm. God doesn't always speak in silence or softness. Sometimes his voice comes in a whirlwind, when we least expect it and most need it. When life feels like a storm, don't assume God is absent. He might be preparing to speak. In verses 4 through 11, we see foundations of the earth. And so in verse 4, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" Big question. God begins with creation, not cruelty. He invites Job to consider the depth of divine wisdom. So who shut up the sea behind doors when I said, "This far you may come and no farther," in verses 8 and 11. And so God taming the oceans, commanding the chaos. God is not just creator, he is sovereign over the wild and untamed. Nothing escapes his command. And so the forces that frighten you, the sea, the storm, the unknown, they all bow to his voice. So in verse 12 through 21, we see light, darkness, and the dawn. And in verse 12 specifically, we see, "Have you ever given order to the morning or shown the dawn in its place?" So God continues with majestic questions. And not to belittle Job, but to lift him into wonder. And so there's a powerful image in verse 13. He says, "Morning light shaking out the wicked like dust." So drawn as a command from God, light obeys him. Even the rhythms of time and light move by God's decree. So if God commands the sunrise, can't he also command hope to rise again in your life? And verse 22 through 38, there's storms, stars, and seasons. And so in verse 31 specifically, he says, "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt?" So God speaks of snow, rain, thunder, and constellations, elements of the world beyond Job's control. There's a powerful image here that stars held in place they're held in place by God's hand. And God, as cosmic artist, he's orchestrating the skies. We don't just live in a world that God made. We live in a world God sustains every single moment. And you may feel powerless, but you're held by the one who holds the stars. That should say something powerful. Verses 39 through 41 is the creatures of the earth. And so in verse 39 he says, "Do you hunt the prey for the lioness? Who provides food for the raven?" God ends this section by speaking of animals, of the wild, of survival. Even the creatures have his care. And this is what Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, "If I feed the birds in the heavens their food, how much more do I feed my children?" I'm not quite referencing it correctly, but you can look at the Sermon on the Mount, and it's pretty early on in his sermon that he mentions how he feeds the animals. He feeds the birds in the air, and so he also cares for us to have our food as well. If God feeds the lion and the raven, how much more does he see you? And so don't forget the daily mercies. God is involved in the hidden things, and he hasn't forgotten you. So there's 3 points of application here. Number 1, God's presence is greater than our expectations. So God didn't answer Job's why. He gave Job a vision of himself. You may not get all the answers, but you can get something better. If you get God's presence, you can get his presence. The second thing is that worship begins with wonder. And Job asks for a courtroom. God gave him a cosmic tour. Isn't that funny? Instead of the courtroom, God is showing Job around the cosmic universe. Sometimes we don't need a debate. We need to be reminded who's on the throne. When life doesn't make sense, step outside, look at the sky, the trees, the stars. God is speaking in everything. God is not distant in the storm. He speaks from the storm, not after it. He is not afraid of your pain or questions. So, yeah, that was the third thing, is that God is not distant in the storm. So bring your storm to God, because he may already be speaking through it. You need to be listening to him and be prepared for his answers. So Job 38 is breathtaking. After silence, suffering, and so much struggle, God breaks in, not with answers, but with questions. And that shifts Job's view from the pain to God's power. And this chapter reminds us that a vision of God's greatness often does more for our hearts than a detailed explanation. Because when we remember who God is, we can finally rest in what we don't understand. And so when you're overwhelmed, when the questions won't stop, listen to the voice in the storm, not to get answers, but to be awed. Because sometimes God's presence is the answer we need most. Yeah. And so it's important, because when we are overwhelmed and we get, like, sometimes the answers aren't something we need to get, and when we see God showing us or answering us with questions, showing that there's so many complexities that we don't have to think about. Think about how much Job doesn't have to worry about all these different things, like the constellations, the animals that get their food, the seasons, the weather, all of this, all questions and things that he doesn't have to worry about. And so how much more is that applied to his own life? He doesn't have to worry. And even if Job were to die physically, his faith in God, he knows God sustains everyone. And he holds, and the soul is something, very precious to God. And so it's important for us to remember that God has a greater purpose for our lives. And when we submit to him, we will come to know what that purpose is eventually. And we also know that it is for good, the greater good. And we may not see God's hand and purpose in his hand, but if we look at who God's heart is, if we look at God through God's heart, look at understanding God's heart, then we can have better assurance in the plans that God has for us. So if we don't know who God is as his character, as his heart, then we have a hard time understanding these things. So, and that's my encouragement for